talk into the mic?
Yes. Sure. Here is some situation that could be recalling some of you something. It happened in 1963. Personally, I was a student at that time, and the fact is I have a very clear memory not only of what happened on that day, the assassination of President Kennedy in Dallas in the United States, but also of where I was and what I was doing at that time. And I could tell you the story of what I was doing. So perhaps it's not clear for you, but I will take another example. But this was called by Brown and Kulik in 1977 a flashbulb memory. So perhaps you would have a better flashbulb memory if we take that picture. Perhaps it is going to recall you something of your personal life. Try to remember who is getting a flashbulb memory, what you were doing at that time. You have it? Yeah, yeah. Probably good number of us. So the concept was introduced in 1977 by these two American authors, and they called it flashbulb memories. That was a great observation, but a quite debatable theory. What they observe is that people have a very clear memory of what happened in the triggering event, of what they were, where they had been, what they were doing at that time, and they tried to theorize about that. So that was really a very interesting observation, great fact. And their theory was that we are equipped with a special biological memory mechanism that is triggered by an event exceeding critical levels of surprise and consequentiality. And I thought that at that moment, a sort of photographic-like picture was taken, whence the name is coming from, flashbulb memories, and that would give you a permanent recording of surrounding events, surrounding details. But as a matter of fact, it doesn't fit with any theory in psychology. Nowhere is memory something fixed. It's always reconstruction, recreation, rework. And so this doesn't fit with the culture in psychology in general. And members of my group in Belgium proposed an alternative theory that was called a cognitive social model of flashbulb memories. And I tested this model during special circumstances in Belgium. In 1993, the king died after 30 years of reign. He was someone praised by the population, and that's created a real surprise and shock in the population. And that's a picture that was taken in front of the king's palace during the days that followed. There were crowds of people for a week in front of the palace. And so my colleague decided to test this theory. And their theory was that the first factor is emotional intensity. The more intense the emotion, the more there would be repetition. And repetition was composed of three factors: the number of thought or rumination that people would have about the event, their social sharing, this means they're talking to other people about what happened, and their consultation of the media. The three factors together represent the number of repetition. And once you get the number of repetition, you can predict both memory of the event and the memory of the personal context in which you were when you heard about, in this case, the death of the king. And with this model, they could show that it would predict a very important percentage of the variance, which makes a good theory for explaining this problem. The cognitive social model of flashbulb memory actually rests on two existing concepts of empirical psychology. On the one hand, a very classic model of memory that was proposed in the 19th century by Ebbinghaus, a famous figure of the history of psychology. And on the second hand, social sharing of emotion, which is a concept that was introduced by my group in 1991 in the social psychology of emotion. Let's go through the two concepts to have a view of them. Ebbinghaus' concept was about the relationship between memory and active recall. When you learn some material, you have first a retention curve. And so you keep the memory, the material in memory for some time. But then very quickly after the first learning, there is a forgetting curve. And so the materials in memory decays very rapidly. Except if you have spaced repetitions. And if you have spaced repetitions, as the graphic is showing, you keep a very good memory of the learning you have got at the beginning. And so the second concept, social sharing of emotion, is precisely an instance, an example of spaced repetition. And it's the demonstration that when people go through an emotional experience, whatever the experience would be, people talk about it. They do so repetitively, so hence the spaced repetition. They do so to people around them, essentially intimates, their best friends, their spouse, their family members, and so on. They do so in the house that follow the event, often in the days that follow, often in the weeks that follow, and sometimes in the months, and sometimes even in the years following the event, when it's very important and it can go through up to the end of your life sometimes. This is observed in 80 to 100 episodes of emotion. This is a very general phenomenon because it's going on irrespective of emotional valence, of so whatever the type of emotion, of gender, whatever your gender, despite the fact that we often have this representation that women do so more than men. It's not true. In the case of social sharing of emotion, gender just on par. Whatever education, you don't need to have high level of education to be able to talk about your emotion. And whatever the culture, we have been investigating this phenomenon in all continents, and we didn't find any exception. Very important, the more intense the emotion felt is, the more it will be shared. It will be more spaced repetition, more and a longer time for social sharing. Let me take a couple of examples to illustrate what I'm telling you about the social sharing of emotion. 4 cases here of observation in longitudinal studies. First example on the left side, it's people who have got a recent bereavement. They've lost a close person, and what we did is observing this person 10 days after the death, 1 month after the death, and 3 months after the death. Every time we were asking these people, how far did you again talk about what you experienced during the event, and how far did you talk about it in the 2 days preceding the question we asked them. And so you can see that at the beginning, of course, as we can expect, everybody was talking about it, but the decay is very slow, and you can see that still 3 months after, many people still talk about what they felt when they lost this person. The example on the right side is recent delivery by a young woman who delivered the baby for the first time, and the question was about the emotion that they felt during the delivery. And you can see that at the beginning here, the scale is in weeks and not in months. You have decay. It takes 5 weeks to reach 2/3 of the population decay, but you can see that here the phenomenon is quite general beginning, and it keeps going for a long time. So it gives a good example of spaced repetition. On the here below, it's medical students who got their first dissection on human body. Very emotional experiences, of course, and you can see that in a 3-week period, there is a very important social sharing of emotion. And finally, the last example is students in psychology who got their major exam for the first time, and how far did they talk about this exam? You can see that even for an event of that type, social sharing is going on in an important proportion. So the theory is that emotions relate to social sharing of emotion, and then there would be a consequence for memory. So you would have an event. If this event is triggering an emotional experience, then there would be social sharing, which is a fact of spaced repetition, and then necessarily it brings you memory consolidation. So this is, of course, as I described it, individual process. What is the relationship between social sharing of emotion and collective memory? We can get it if we have a look at social sharing listeners, so people who are exposed to the social sharing of emotion by someone else who just went through an emotional episode. Here we take a look at the basic emotion experienced by people who are listeners of a social sharing of emotion. We have here 121 persons. Each of them has been exposed to someone telling an emotional episode, and immediately after, we ask them to rate the basic emotion that they experienced on a scale from 0 to 7, 0 not at all, 7 very much. And you can see that they experienced all types of emotion according to the type of stories that they were told. There is one emotion which speaks in a spectacular manner across all the other ones. It's the emotion of interest. You can see that the average is 6, which means that most people have been rating it at the highest degree, on 7 on the scale. It's showing that people are interested by the emotional stories of other people. We like listen to stories of emotion told by others, and this fits with our experience. Probably if there would be that process of interest for emotion, we wouldn't go to the movies, we wouldn't watch television, we wouldn't read the newspapers, we wouldn't read novels, and so on and so on. So we have a basic interest for emotion. Next, we asked those people the emotion that they felt through the narration of the episode. And here we have been gathering the episodes under 3 categories. We have low intensity level episodes on the left side on the graph, moderate intensity episode, and high intensity episode. And we have the rating of people on a scale from 0 to 10, 0, no emotion at all, 10, the highest emotion I can experience in my life. And you can see that there is a clear relationship, linear relationship between the emotionality of the episode that is told and the emotion felt by the listener. Which means that listening to emotion is inducing emotions in the listening person. So this is an interesting information, and this is bringing some reasoning. Here is a syllogism. If emotions are socially shared, as I told you in my previous slide, and if targets, listeners, experience emotion when they are listening, this means that thereafter, these targets or these listeners should share what they heard with third persons. It's a bit unexpected, but because we often consider that our emotions private things, and we do not expect people to whom we told them to go to other person and to tell what we told them. Actually, we do so in general. Here is a summary of observation about this process. Person A has been experiencing an emotion, and this person A has been telling to person B in primary sharing what happened to him or her. And we have an instance here of a study on nearly 1,400 episodes, and it was observed that the primary sharing is going on in 92% of the cases, which fits the figure I told you before, between 80 and 100% of cases. And the number of repetition is 3 to 5. Let me insist that we are here on emotional episodes of everyday life, which means episodes that we will go through during the day, today, next day, and so on and so on. Small emotions. You can see that social sharing is going on. Then, how far is it going to go through secondary sharing? And here, green, the second figure, that's secondary sharing. You can see that it was observed in 75% of the case with 1 or 2 repetitions. And then the question was whether the person who heard someone telling what was told to from another person, would that person go to tertiary sharing and told another one? And actually it's the case for 64% of the cases, with 1 or 2 repetitions. And then we can summarize the collective dynamic of the social sharing of emotion. You are in the center, the person in red. You have been through an emotional episode of some intensity, and then you have been telling 2, 3, 4, or 5 persons of your own social network what happened to you. Each of these persons is going to tell 2, 3, or 4 other persons what happened to you. And each of these persons in turn will tell, in the tertiary sharing, will tell 1, 2, or 3 other persons what happened to you. You don't know it, but everybody in your social network is aware of what happened to you because of this process. So that was abundantly documented in empirical studies. Now, is it realistic? Could we test that? That was my dream to test this, but it's very difficult to conduct such a study. But American colleagues took us seriously and they wanted to test the model. It's a colleague who is giving a class on psychology and law, which is a classic class for psychology students, relationship between psychology and juridical things. And in the context of this class, the professor with Kent Harbour here is taking his students to visit a number of things, like a tribunal, like a justice court, police office, and so on and so on. And in this series, they are going to visit a hospital morgue, which is, of course, for students, a strong emotional experience. And so what he wanted to do is to test how far this visit, the emotional experience of the visit of the morgue would propagate in the social network of students. And the day after the visit, he asked the students to whom they talked about what they did. And immediately after, he asked the student to recontact this person and to check with this person, did they talk to some other person? And when they did so, they recontact the person we are told to ask them if they did talk about the morgue experience. And doing so, they could, in the successive circle, observe 97% of people who proceeded to the primary sharing with 6.21 repetitions. And second circle, secondary sharing, 82% of the case, 1.46 repetition. And the third circle, 48% of tertiary sharing with 1.26. Notice that the figures are very close to the one I showed in the previous slide. So in 3 days, in this network, 881 persons have been hearing about the visit of the morgue. So it fits rather well the prediction. So we can conclude that emotional episodes which are experienced by one person will be distributed in their social network. What would be the function of this system? Well, as individuals, we experience emotion, and every experience of emotion is an opportunity to detect a situation which is either unpredictable or uncontrollable, or both, which is basic definition of emotion: unpredictable, predictability, uncontrollability. So this means risky situation. And being informed of what is risky, it's very precious information, of course. And then what can happen to you is transmitted to the group, because members of the group could also make the same experience as the one you got through. And this is then feeding up, on the one hand, social knowledge about the hazards of the world, and then collective memory. Probably if you go through your own personal experience, you can find many examples of that kind. An example I'm often giving is the case that happened to me some 30 years ago. A vague cousin living far away from my place was in the morning having breakfast in his room, and then went down with the breakfast tray in the staircases, and he fell down. And in falling down, he had a bad accident, and he got paralyzed for the rest of his life. I can tell you that since 30 years, every time I would go in the stairs with the trail, I will be extremely careful, having in mind the story of that cousin. So that's a typical example of the lesson we can take from the emotional experience of others. The relationship with social sharing, collective memory become even more spectacular in the case of collective emotional episode, which means when an emotional event strikes a community or an entire nation. Let me take the following example. This is a very spectacular demonstration of the social sharing of emotion in case of collective emotional event. In March 2011, there was, as you remember, a bad earthquake in Japan, which provoked the famous tsunami and the problem with the nuclear central. So in the picture I'm going to show, we will see the tweets leaving Japan and going across the world in pink color, and in green color, the secondary social sharing, it's been the retweets from receivers to another place in the world. And this during 1 hour immediately following the earthquake. So the demonstration is going to be very fast, but you will see in pink the tweets from Japan, in green the retweets from receivers. And here it starts. So 1 hour of exchanges. See the pink tweets from Japan, the green covering the world except Africa, which is poorly connected to these things. See how spectacular? So this social sharing of emotion, of collective emotional episode, and the beginning of the process of secondary, tertiary, and so on, social sharing. What is typical when an emotional event strikes a community or a nation is that everybody becomes, both at the time, a social sharing of emotion sender and a social sharing of emotion receiver. And I didn't go through, because it would take me time, through data showing that every time you talk about an emotional episode, it reactivates all the facets of your emotion. So talking about an emotion, it's reviving the emotion. This means that in each social sharing of emotion round, it's going to revive sender's emotion and revive receiver's emotion. And if the emotion are revived, they would experience again the need to share their emotion. So there is a continuous reviving of social sharing of emotion. And you can see in the representation, a couple of persons, how they would constantly stimulate and re-stimulate one another to feel the emotion and to feel the need again to talk about the emotion. In this case, repetition can take really astronomical values. And this is bringing what could be called collective emotional effervescence. Here are a couple of illustrations. Typical case of collective emotional effervescence, the recent situation in France, Je suis Charlie, you remember that. How excited people were about that, and how many of them went to this demonstration and went to manifest their views without really thinking of what they were doing. And many of them, after the fact, realized that perhaps that was not exactly the type of cause they wanted to fight for. But at that time, everybody wanted to be a part of the collective effervescence without thinking, in a sense, or without thinking back intensively. Another example was the death of Princess Diana in the United Kingdom. I took also the case of the death of King Baudouin in Belgium, which provoked a similar emotional effervescence. Now, when you have a process with such an active stimulation of emotion in a population, how would this stop? How could you break the collective emotional effervescence? My colleague and friend James Pennebaker, who's a social psychologist from the University of Texas in the United States, previously in the city of Dallas, also in Texas, made a I'm going to come back to his name because he made a very important number of very interesting observations. He conducted a longitudinal study on two important episodes that happened in the United States in the 90s. On the one hand, the declaration of the first Gulf War, which was a very important emotional episode in the United States because they didn't have a war since Vietnam, so that was a strike. And second, there was at the same time an earthquake in California. They conducted a longitudinal study to observe, on the one hand, the amount of thought people would have on a period of 12 weeks, and the second hand, the amount of talk about the war on the one hand, and about the earthquake on the second hand. And you can see that the picture is about the same for the earthquake and for the war, for thought and for talks. But what is striking is the progressive decline. So something is provoking a decline, and that's probably the question we should try to solve. And we could reproduce this observation of the decline in, together with my colleague Dario Paez and his team in Spain, when there was this Madrid station bombing, terrorist attack in Madrid that killed some 200 Spanish people in 2004. And here you have the proportion of people during the first week, third week, and eighth week, non-proportion of people who talked about the episode, who heard about the episode, and who thought about the episode. And you can see that there is this sharp decline across weeks. And the same for the frequency, so the space of repetition, for talking, for hearing, and for thinking. And Pennebaker, with this observation, built up a stage model of collective responses and observed that actually there are 3 periods during this 12 weeks time during which there would be a progressive extension of the manifestation. And the first period, stage 1, was called an emergency period, in which there were abundant thoughts, abundant talks, important media coverage, and also a number of facts about social psychology, very high social integration, manifestation of solidarity, and very important pro-social behavior manifested by people. And we know that when such collective episode happen, we have this phenomenon of donation, people giving money, as they did, for instance, at the time of the tsunami in the Asian countries a couple of years ago. There were so many donations that even a number of instances like Physicians Without Borders couldn't spend the money they received because they are too much. The second stage is a stage of plateau during the second month with abundant thought, but talks fade away and major coverage disappears. But still social integration is going on. And finally, the third stage is extinction after the second month. Thoughts fade away. The social linkage between people and pro-sociality vanish also, and there is a return to normal life. So, what was the cause of this decrement of interest and effervescence? Well, Benedict did a great observation. He noticed that after the California earthquake, people were progressively wearing T-shirts with a quite explicit message. Thank you for not sharing with me your earthquake experience. Very interesting. People did not want to hear anymore others sharing their experience. But if you ask people, they themselves would be still ready to talk about it, but no one would listen to them. So that's the system which is stopping the evolution of the effervescence process. So the question is now, why the social construct? Actually makes sense, because catastrophes or dramatic events or any situation with victimization, that's very highly threatening to ordinary people. We, ordinary people, we live in a relatively safe and healthy world. We confirm one another this all the time. For instance, when we meet one another, we are asking, how do you do? Fine. How do you do? How are you? Fine, and so on and so on, confirming that we are in this world of people who are in a good and healthy situation. So we deny in this world, we deny hazards. We rest upon basic positive illusions which are well documented in social psychology. For instance, we believe that I will be all right, or we believe that accidents happen to others, and many, many other things all the time. So basically, we need to avoid victim, to avoid illness, to avoid death, and so on and so on. And this is bringing very difficult relationship between non-victim and victim, because the process of social constraint is going on the side of non-victim. How is it going on? Because non-victim system is inclined to avoid and limit exchanges with victim, to block the social sharing of emotion, to minimize their problem, to force good mood, you will be all right, and so on, to accent the positive side of the episode, the benefit that could be taken from the episode, to make use of denial, to express disbelief, and so on and so on. And this is creating dramatic relationship, because on the side of victim, the worst thing that can happen to you after victimization is the fact that people won't believe what happened to you. So this means that because of this non-victim attitude, information on what happened often fail to feed collective memory. And I would like to take an historical example with the social constraints against the social sharing of emotion that happened in the case of the Holocaust after World War II. In these circumstances, some of the survivors, and certainly not all of them, far from that, and I will take example of that a bit later, but some survivors were highly motivated to share what happened in their camp experience. That was the case, for instance, of Primo Levi, who might be the most famous author about the concentration camp. He wrote his first book in 1936, and it was published in 1947. That's the book called If This Is a Man, which is probably his most famous book. And he's telling that for him, the need to survive and giving testimony was one and the same thing. He told in an